Hi, I'm Tracy from Tracy Taylor Coaching. I'm a life and career coach, and I help people to get unstuck, to uncover what it is that's blocking them, and to help them move from overwhelm, exhaustion, and burnout into a happy and fulfilled career. So today's workshop is going to start helping you to unpick some of that, to really get underneath what's happening for you so that you can then build the platform to move forward in a happy and fulfilled way. And the basis of our workshop today is about stories. Now, in life, we're going to have successes, we're going to have failures, and we're going to have that whole spectrum in between. But what really sets out the difference between one thing happening and another thing happening is not actually the facts of the situation. It's what our brain chooses to believe about the situation. Once something happens, our brain then decides whether that was good or bad. It will tell a story about it. It will either say, this was a good thing, it's helpful, it's going to take me closer to where I want to be, or it will say, well, that wasn't so great, this isn't going to help me get to where I want to be. Or some kind of spectrum in the middle, or wider extremes. But our brain, our thoughts, these stories are going to come up, and it's from there that we make choices about whether that thing was good or bad, and that makes us happy or sad, etc. Okay, so don't worry if you don't quite understand what I'm talking about there. You don't need to really believe or understand all of that right now to get the most out of this workshop. But so we're really going to give you an introduction here about what that all means and how that can help you with your career. So what I'd love you to do right now is to think about what is something that you are telling yourself about your job right now, about your career. What are one of those stories? What are some of those thoughts that keep coming up for you about your career? So I'll start. While I was in my corporate career, I worked in business change and business turnaround, and I had this same thought, this same story that kept going around in my head day in, day out, really, whether it was like early on in my career when I was starting off in project management, or whether it was much further along when I was running change programs. It didn't really seem to matter how successful I was or at what point in my career. It would be the same kind of story that would be coming up for me. And that story was, my job is pointless and I'm not achieving anything. So that's my job is pointless and I'm not achieving anything. That was the story I was telling myself. And you can probably imagine from there that the feelings associated with that weren't great. So there's a lot of sadness, a lot of confusion, a lot of fear and anxiety about, if I'm not achieving anything and my job's pointless, I'm going to get found out. That kind of emotions, those kind of feelings coming through. Okay, so let's have a little look at what you guys have been saying. So we've got Marcus here says, I'm terrible at my job. I have no idea what I should be doing. Yeah, I can see how that could lead to some pretty uncomfortable feelings for you there, Marcus. So maybe we'll explore that a little bit as we go through. Kathy says, my job is chaos. No one knows what they're doing and I need to get out. This makes me feel scared as I don't know what I would do if I left. So yeah, thanks, Kathy. That's a really common issue. I'm sure there's lots of people today that are thinking the same thing. And it can be really difficult, especially with that kind of added fear at the end there that you don't know what you'd do if you left. You don't know what that way out is. And those thoughts and those stories can bring up a lot of fear and anxiety. Absolutely. Okay, so now we've done that. So have a little think about what those stories are for you. Here comes the challenge. I want you to think about what are the actual facts of the situation here. So there's a lot of thoughts, a lot of things that are happening that we may think a lot, but that doesn't mean they're factual. So I'll give you an example. I'll try and come up with a fact for my situation. So my thought being that my job is pointless and I'm not achieving anything. So one of the things that always used to come up for me was that I'm not busy enough. And the fact of the situation there was that if I was scheduled to work for 8 hours, I would only be working for 6 hours. So you could look at that as a fact. You could set out, if you looked at what I was doing every 15 minutes, you could factually write down working, not working, at my desk, at my computer, doing my work, etc. And you could logically say, well, actually, yes, there are 2 hours here where Tracy is not actively working on the project towards her job. Okay, so that was the fact. That's what the fact was. And for me, that drove me to come up with lots of thoughts about that, which I've already talked about, being my job is pointless, I'm not achieving anything. So let's see what other facts are coming through. Melanie says, my manager gave me feedback that I need to improve. Okay, yeah, that sounds like a fact. Assuming that that's actually what your manager said, Melanie. So if your manager said, Melanie, you need to improve, those are the words that came out of her mouth, that is a fact. If, however, you are interpreting what she said as meaning that, then again, that wouldn't be a fact, that would be a story that you're telling yourself. So maybe just interrogate that a little bit, Melanie, and see whether those were the words that she said or whether that was your interpretation. And what have we got here? Georgia says, I always procrastinate and don't get things done. Okay, maybe, but this isn't quite a fact. So again, the story that you're telling yourself is that you always procrastinate. What would be really interesting, I think, is to dig down into what actually happens for you in this situation. So for instance, it might be that, I don't know, on Monday, I was scheduled to write a report and I didn't write it. Or it could be, I set aside 4 hours on Thursday to plan this event and I didn't do any work on it until Monday. Whatever the situation is for you, obviously I don't know the details about what you do, but it's interesting to try and get really specific about that so that your brain isn't mistaking those kind of facts with the stories. Okay, so now hopefully you've all had a chance to think about some of the facts in your situation. As I said, one of my facts was that when I was at work, I did not work 100% of the time. This is one of the thoughts that led me to have the belief that my job is pointless and I'm not achieving anything. That then led me to feeling sad, frustrated, anxious, demotivated, etc. So you can see how I'm starting to build up what that story is from the facts through to how that ended up making me feel. So the next thing I want you to think about is to ask yourself, why are you choosing to have that belief? So this is an interesting one, I think, for me. So one of the reasons I think I was choosing to have this belief was so that I could fix it. I felt that there was something wrong, that I was doing something wrong, and that I needed to fix it. I felt that I should be working harder and that if I didn't, I was going to lose the respect of my colleagues, I was going to get found out, and ultimately I was going to end up losing my job. So yeah, wow, that's quite interesting. There's a lot of good reasons why I was thinking this thought, because I was trying to protect myself and I was trying to fix it, and I was trying to say, look, careful here, there's something going wrong here, you need to sort this out. So what could this be for you? Now let's get really curious here and completely non-judgmental, because we don't want to beat ourselves up for having this thought and we don't want to get upset about it. We just want to start getting curious about actually might this be helpful? Why am I actually having this thought? Okay, let's have a look at what others have said here. So Georgia says similar, trying to protect myself and wanting to change my behaviour because I could end up losing my job if I don't. Absolutely. So yes, there's something about being fear as a driver for making choices. We think that if we scare ourselves enough, we're going to start making different choices. And in Georgia's case, she's going to stop procrastinating. She's going to get on with her job. She's going to nail it this time. There's some sort of fear-driven actions that we think we're going to take if we beat ourselves up. So that's quite interesting to know, really. And again, don't beat yourself up about it now. It's just this is quite an interesting thing to understand and to know is going on. Marcus says because it's true. Okay, fair enough, Marcus. I think we'll need to keep exploring this a little bit further for you then to kind of understand what it is that's going on here. But that does kind of neatly bring me to my next question, which is there anything about this that isn't factual? Okay, let's go. So for me, my thought, or my facts rather, is that I didn't work 100% of the time. So what isn't factual about that? Well, it's interesting really, because when I delve deeper into it, it's quite interesting because okay, so my fact was that I didn't work 100% of the time when I was in my job. And that's a really interesting one, because what is work? And somebody else might look at what I was doing and say, well, you were working, you were taking time to think, you were doing other things while less urgent priorities were being played out. You know, there could actually be a different interpretation that somebody could give on, well, what is work? And the other thing that's definitely not factual is the idea that I should have been working 100% of the time. And I knew that then, and I know that now, is that actually sitting at your desk working on a project 100% of the time in an 8-hour day is actually not productive and probably doesn't help you to get the outcome that you want, which is a decent project, a decent piece of work. So while perhaps potentially you could agree with the fact that I wasn't working 100% of the time, the idea that I should have been working 100% of the time, the thought that I was telling myself that actually working 100% of the time is normal and required or is even desirable, I mean, that's just not true. I mean, I wouldn't ever expect somebody to be working 100% of the time. I'd always expect them to have downtime. I'd always expect them to be able to take a breather, have a coffee, spend an hour reading the paper just to expand your brain a little bit, do something different. So really even the fundamental concept of that fact is fairly flawed. And yeah, mostly like 100% my opinion. My opinion was that I should work 100% of the time. And that's, again, with all of this, it's just interesting to start reflecting and to understand what's going on for you. Let's see what other people have said here. So Georgia says 100% opinion. That's great. Thank you. Marcus, great. Marcus, what are you saying here? So Marcus says, I think the fact is true that I got promoted and there are things I haven't done before. But thinking that I don't know what I'm doing is my opinion, even though it definitely feels true. Exactly. Oh, absolutely, Marcus. I think it may be a fact that there are some things in your job that you've not done before. But spending all of our life focusing on what we're not good at isn't particularly helpful. And so extrapolating that, so basically going from there are some things in my job I've not done before to I'm terrible at my job, that's 100% an opinion rather than a fact. Because somebody else could look at what you're doing and say, you are brilliant at your job. There are just a few areas that you could grow in. So that's really interesting, Mark, because it's interesting how you've been able to kind of detach slightly from saying, I'm terrible at my job, even though I can tell obviously that really feels true for you right now. But it's about trying to find those grey areas, find those areas where our brain can say, well, actually, maybe you're not meant to be able to do all those things right now. And maybe not being able to do them doesn't make you terrible at your job. It just makes you a normal human being who has normal capabilities. Some things you need to get better at. So brilliant, that's really interesting. And leading on from that is my next question, which is, what would someone else think about your situation? And this one makes me laugh a little bit, because I know there are loads of you listening to this right now that are thinking, hang on a minute, you don't work 100% of the time and you're moaning about that? Like you're telling yourself that's a bad thing? Because there'll be so many people out there who are thinking, I'm overwhelmed, I'm burnt out, I'm working 24 hours a day and I'm still not getting my job done. So the idea that I could be sitting here moaning about not working all of the time and feeling bad about that probably sounds completely ludicrous. But that's actually quite a good example for you all to realise that whatever situation you're in, you can look at it from a different angle. And somebody else looking in at your situation might be thinking something completely different about it. And if you can start to question and use your brain to think about, well, what is it that's coming up for me and why am I choosing to look at it this way? And again, that word curious, as I keep saying, keeps coming up, but that's genuinely what we're trying to do here, is to get curious about what's happening for you and not to beat yourself up. Okay, so Melanie says, it's possible. So, okay, Melanie, yeah, this was about the feedback from your manager. So Melanie says, it's possible someone else might think it's great to get that feedback. Now I can focus my energy where it is needed. Absolutely, Melanie, 100%. There can be people out there that are thinking, I wish my manager would actually give me some feedback, give me some focus. I wish my manager would tell me what I can do to get better so that I can get really good at my career, so I stop stagnating. So yeah, that feedback, it's cliche, but feedback's a gift. So definitely there'll be people out there who are thinking, please give me feedback, I want to grow. And you can use that to grow, which is an amazing opportunity. Francis says, my thought is that I can't cope. I guess someone else in my situation might be able to cope. So this one's quite interesting. So your thought here is, I can't cope. So it might actually be interesting for you to go back to the previous question and ask yourself in a really gentle, curious way whether that's true or not. Because it might be that you actually are coping. And often these situations, it's the fear that we won't be able to cope that really starts to create that anxiety. When actually we find that even though it's uncomfortable, even though that we don't really like the feelings that we're feeling right now, actually we are coping. And I obviously don't know your situation, but just get curious and think about that for a little while. And similarly, somebody else looking in on your situation who was feeling exactly the same way as you might consider that as coping. And again, I don't know your situation, so please, again, just get curious with this. I'm not trying to tell you that you're absolutely wrong here, but it's just starting to explore what are those grey areas and what might other people think in this situation. So for me, I know I've been in situations where I've just felt I can't cope, I can't do this anymore. Yeah, I have been getting up for work every day. I have been getting on with it, and I have been actually managing those emotions. I've not been enjoying it, but I've been managing those emotions. And so, yeah, it's an interesting one. So obviously, we need to get a bit clearer on what your situation is there, Francis, to be able to understand. But it's still useful to think about what somebody else might think in your situation, and would they look at your situation and think that actually maybe you're coping quite well considering what's going on. Okay, so the next thing I want you to think about is, how big does this feel? How important does this all feel for you? So for me, at the time when I was going through this, I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, it was like 8, 9. It was way up there. It was critical that I could find some meaning and some fulfillment, and I could prove that I was busy and important and was achieving something for the good of my career and my future. Everything, it felt like everything depended on it. And yeah, so it was pretty high up there. So once you've given a little bit of thought to that, I want you to ask your brain nicely to start thinking, well, how can I reduce this down to, say, like a 6? How could I take this from being this sort of all-encompassing, everything I think about, down to kind of a 6, where it feels a little bit more manageable, a little bit more comfortable? And think about some of the things that we've talked through today, about whether it's fact or opinion, how someone else might look at it, you know, some of those things. What could you be telling yourself? And how could you be creating a slightly different story that would feel better? So for me, I think what's come out of this that's really interesting is actually there's a story there that I'm not supposed to be working 100% of the time. And that actually very few people work 100% of the time. They are spending that time thinking, they're spending that time doing something else that enables their brain to rejuvenate, to then be able to get on and do their job. And the other side of it, which is quite interesting, is the idea that actually a lot of people would kill to be in the position that I was in, where I was achieving, I was doing my job properly, I was getting good feedback, and I wasn't having to work 24 hours a day. So I can kind of see it from a different perspective. But I think the real one for me is actually this understanding the amount of pressure that I was putting on myself, and realizing that I was the only one putting that pressure on myself. And while that's quite daunting, because there's still that real fear that, like, no, I need to be working all the time, otherwise it's all going to fall apart, I can still acknowledge that actually you know, it's okay. It's just a thought, it's just an opinion. So again, I'll just have a little look, see what you guys are saying. Melanie says, I can choose to see this as an opportunity to grow. Absolutely. Getting feedback, difficult feedback, is it's not nice at times, but definitely you can see this as an opportunity to grow. This is a point where you can really take control of your career and move it forward. Thank you for that. And Tanya says, I'm just not sure. That's okay. This exercise is really about opening up to different opportunities and different possibilities. It's not necessarily going to fix everything straight away, but our brain, I promise you, is the most powerful tool that we have. And if we can set it to good use, if we can point it in the direction of some helpful stories, they're going to move us in the right direction, then that's the greatest gift. So if you found this workshop helpful and you'd like to continue exploring some of these issues or concepts with me, then you can get in touch at tracytaylorcoaching@gmail.com. That's Tracy Taylor, that's TracyTaylor coaching@gmail.com, or visit my website, which is www.tracytaylorcoaching.com. That's www.tracytaylorcoaching.com, and you can find information on there about how to contact me, how to work with me, how to set up a free consultation so you can start to take some of these concepts further and really explore how you can move forward in the most positive and helpful and meaningful way for you. Thank you. Bye.